The game follows Phoenix Wright, a defense attorney fresh out of law school in his first few months of being on the job, and the first case he gets is a murder case, and his best friend Larry is the defendant. Oh boy, this is going to be good. Now, due to the spoilery nature of talking about a visual novel's story, I'll dedicate a whole section of the video on my thoughts on each case, for those that want to hear them. For now, let's just say that while the cases are self-contained, there is a main narrative throughout the whole game that will keep you engaged, even if you don't really care for the particulars of a specific case. Although they're all murder cases and pretty well written across the board, so you'll likely be enjoying them all in their own right. The game also does a tremendous job of always giving you just enough information to make further guesses, but also withholding some specifics to not let you know everything from the get-go. This always keeps you on your toes and makes some of the dramatic turns in the story a lot more impactful. As a visual novel, Ace Attorney isn't overly spectacular graphically, but at the same time, it's one of the most memorable and engaging ones out there. This is not only due to the character models and backgrounds being clean and concise, but also to how the characters are designed. Every single person you meet looks unique, memorable, and just over the top. That's also true for animations. There are a lot of visual effects like pop-ins, screen shakes, or flashes that make the whole game feel a lot more alive and gives the characters even more chances to show off their weird personalities and tics. In addition to visual effects, there are also tons of audio clips that enhance the immersion and give each scene more oomph. Most of them are pretty subtle and you won't notice until they are pointed out to you. Remember this sound? You've heard that many times when playing through the game, but it's always very deliberately placed before or after specific words to give them more meaning. Also, who would have thought that a knife sound would go so well with someone being contradicted in court? And then there's the soundtrack. Sugimori Masakazu isn't exactly a big name in the gaming music scene. He did the soundtracks for Ace Attorney, Beautiful Joe, Ghost Trick, Vanquish, and most recently Murder by Numbers. Notice a pattern here? All of these are games that were lauded for their catchy and unique music scores. And you know what? That praise is wholly deserved, because you'll be humming these tunes forever. Sugimori has a very unique approach to writing game music by using lots of hammer-ons and pull-offs, a technique usually used on string elements in his synth compositions. This gives the tracks a very dynamic feeling with notes constantly switching and melding into each other. The music also always manages to hit the feeling of each scene perfectly, offering happy and laid-back tracks alongside high adrenaline themes like Pursuit. If you've been watching the footage so far, you've probably noticed, but I'll say it nevertheless. Ace Attorney isn't your average visual novel, and not just because of the plethora of visual busyness, endearing characters, or the dance-worthy soundtrack. No, because this visual novel wants you to not only read, but also think, speculate, and act on it. The main way to do so is through cross-examination. When in a trial, witnesses will be called to the stand to give their testimony, which you will then be allowed to pick apart by either pressing them for more information through banter and questions, or by presenting evidence that contradicts their testimony. Obviously, since this is a linear story, there is always one specific solution to any given testimony, so each of them is kind of like a little puzzle that you need to solve by taking the testimony finding things that don't match up with the facts you've learned in the case so far and pointing them out. If you ever present the wrong evidence, you will be penalized. In other words, you lose HP. If your HP runs out, you will instantly lose the case and have to start at the latest checkpoint. Since these trials can last pretty long, you should always pay attention to everything that is being said and avoid getting a game over. Or you just save your game each time you're unsure so you can reload if you make a mistake, making the whole HP thing pretty redundant. Pressing the wrong testimony will not get you penalized though. In fact, I recommend you always press any part of the testimony even if you already have a hunch on how to proceed. Why? Because there's still dialogue hidden behind every line you can press, and even if it doesn't directly influence the case, it's still a lot of fun to see all the crazy characters have to say and fleshes out each case tremendously. Apart from cross-examinations, trials follow a very linear structure where you usually just read and follow along the proceedings, with the occasional question or most often very obvious evidence presenting being thrown your way. But where do you even get the evidence? That's where the game's second gameplay portion comes from. Investigations. Trials in Ace Attorney can, because the game's setting has a law that doesn't allow for more, run up to 3 days. You will often find that there isn't enough evidence to make a clear case at a certain point in a trial, which is when the judge will adjourn the court for the day and task you with going to the scene of the crime to find more evidence and talk to the people involved. While this is, in essence, still very linear, as you cannot progress to the next day without finding everything you need, you get a lot more freedom in these portions. You can walk around the different locations important to each case, examine everything, and find new evidence or clues by doing so. You will also be able to freely talk to people without being constantly interrupted by the prosecution.
Objection! Objection! Objection!
So this is usually your chance to get some juicy info out of people. This often involves tricking them with info you got from other people, giving them items, or sometimes even bribing them. The things you do for justice, huh? Other than the walking around and examining the different places, this portion is still very reading heavy. The main difference here being that you can't fail and tackle most things in the order that you want to. Alright, so we've talked about both types of gameplay the game offers you. There really isn't much more than that. So let's do something I usually try to avoid in these reviews but need to touch on because I think most people who watch this video want to hear about it. Let's talk about my opinion on each of the 5 cases. If you haven't played through the game yet, I strongly encourage you to skip this portion because it will be full of spoilers. Yeah, I make a video and tell you not to watch it, I know, weird. Anyways, I warned you, so let's go. The first case starts you off with a cutscene depicting the murder and then puts you directly in court. Phoenix wants to defend his friend Larry from being convicted as the murderer of his own girlfriend because he was allegedly seen at the crime scene when she died. And he says he did it. Larry is our idiot of the story, although there are quite a few more of these coming our way later, and it's our job to find the real culprit. Oh wait, we don't, because the game already showed us. To be honest, I found this to be a bit too on the nose, but I guess it's fine since it's the very first case and supposed to ease you into the game. This case is essentially a tutorial. You know who the killer is, and even if you didn't, there's only one witness and his last name is Saw It. Yeah. The crime itself is also pretty basic, but the case does a good job of teaching you all the important things you'll need to crack the harder ones, as well as introduce you to some of the characters and the accompanying over-the-top wackiness. Our second case, titled Turnabout Sisters, somehow forgets how the first one started and does the exact same thing, showing us the killer. God, it's even the same murder weapon. Only this time, the victim isn't some random woman in her house, but Mia Fey, Phoenix's mentor, boss, and friend. And he's the one who finds her when he comes back to the office late at night. Next to her corpse, Mia's sister Maya is kneeling and crying and oh crap, there it goes. We've got a witness calling the police and getting Maya arrested. Obviously, Phoenix decides to defend her and find out who really killed Mia. even though we already know. Let me be clear here. I think showing us the culprit in this case was a bad idea. The crime is also pretty simple, and if you happen to examine the phone before the police arrives in the beginning, you can easily put 2 and 2 together and spend the whole case knowing exactly what happened, but not being able to prove it because the game obfuscates some vital evidence. I won't completely shit on the case though, because it does have some very good things going for it. First of all, I really love the characters here. April May is funny, and I love the innuendos she constantly throws out to people who have no idea how to deal with women. Red White is a very hateable but fun antagonist that opens a lot of questions regarding how fair the trials you face and will face in the future actually are. It even introduces a lot of the most important characters like Maya, Edgeworth, and Grossberg. It's also the first time you actually get to investigate crime scenes, introduces the spirituality that often comes into play, more on that later, and sets up the DL6 incident as well as some important bits in the later cases of the game. It also ends with Maya joining Phoenix as his partner, so we'll be seeing a lot more of her from now on. All in all, this case is definitely a stepping stone for the rest of the game and does that very well. If they had made the actual crime a bit harder to figure out, or at least not thrown the perpetrator right in your face, this could have been even better. As it is, it's more of a very good but way too long tutorial. Turnabout Samurai, or as I like to call it, How to Play a Good Song to Death, is our third case in this game, and in my opinion, the worst one in the entire game. Our victim this time is Jack Hammer, an actor who plays the antagonist in a kids show named Steel Samurai that Maya happens to be a big fan of, and the alleged killer is none other than the Steel Samurai himself. I like the idea of the hero being made out as the killer, but the game never really expands upon the problems this brings, and flat out drops the whole issue about midway through the case. I also think the murder itself is very interesting. How you are completely unaware to some of the people present on the day of the crime due to some dubious arrangements. How you dive deep into the past of the characters to see some resemblance of a motive. And even how you can piece together what happens as soon as you notice the broken fence. What I don't like about this case is how unbelievably circumstantial everything is. The monkey head miraculously fell down due to strong wind while the murder was going on? Bullshit. Cody just happened to be exactly where and when the murder took place, saw the whole thing, but never once thought to talk about the Steel Samurai attacking a helpless woman? Bullshit. The studio big shots as well as Sam were all in on what happened at the trailer, but they would rather throw Will and the studio, and thus their investment, under the bus instead of just making D. Vasquez admit to the truth. You know, the truth that would have been justifiable self-defense? Bullshit. And while we're on the topic, how the fuck did the studio not have to close down after publicly being exposed about trying to frame their employee for murder? How can Sam just go on making his shows after being made out to have been a conspirator and covering up the killing? And why in the freaking hell is Will Powers still working in that place after all that has happened? Not to mention that this case is somehow completely disconnected from everything else that happens in the game. No characters from this case ever pop back up, and none of the happenings in this case have any bearing on future events. The case is a fun playthrough if you don't think about it too much because of the fun setting and good pacing, but nothing more than that. Definitely the worst of the 5 and the only one that doesn't feel important to the overall narrative of the game. The fourth and last case of the original Ace Attorney, fittingly titled Turnabout Goodbyes, again opens up with a cutscene depicting the moment of the murder, only this time the killer isn't shown to us, and even better, the scene is actually a fake out because we get to see what the killer wants us to see. This is the way to start off a murder mystery. You get a basic idea of what the case is about, but everything else is either not clear from the beginning or you have to think about it and come to the conclusion yourself. The victim this time is Robert Hammond, who was killed on a lake on Christmas Eve by none other than our evil but actually not so evil prosecutor Edgeworth. And a lot of the case revolves not only around him but his past. We get to explore what happened on the lake on Christmas Eve, meet a few new characters like Lotta Hart, who was camping out in the lake surrounding forest when the crime took place, and Manfred von Karma, Edgeworth's mentor and undefeated prosecutor for 40 years in a row. Von Karma is an excellent final boss for this finale, not only being your opponent in the case against Edgeworth, but also being connected to the DL6 incident, the crime that Mia was investigating before she was killed. Turns out that this incident was about Edgeworth's father being killed in the courthouse, a crime that was never actually solved, and the Faye family is deeply connected to this case. I really loved how everything came together for this one, from stuff being mentioned and hinted at on the sidelines in other cases, as well as most of the characters you've met so far playing a role here. The case itself is also a lot tighter than the others, especially compared to what came before, and there aren't any loose ends. At least the current day one is, because DL6 reeks of cop-outs. For one, how on earth did everyone who handled the case back then miss the freaking bullet hole in the elevator door and make the connection to a twice-fired murder weapon? Even with some hiccups like these, the case is still a blast to play through and definitely the best one out of the original 4. Rise from the Ashes. You might not know this, but this one wasn't in the original game on the Game Boy Advance. It's a bonus case that was added in the DS remake, making some use of the additional features and power of the hardware, which is why it's the only case in the game that has 3D scenes, and they are horrifying. But more on that soon. Maya has left to continue her training, and Phoenix hasn't taken any cases in months. That is, until Emma's Sky comes along, asking Phoenix to help her sister, reminding him of Maya and prompting him to take on the case. And who should her sister be other than Lana Sky, the chief prosecutor who is being tried for murder of a police officer in the prosecutor's office building, and she is adamant on having committed the crime, and there's tons of evidence against her. Oh, and of course there's an eyewitness as well. Yeah, they really try to lay it on thick that this is a trial you're not going to win, but you wouldn't be Phoenix Wright if you didn't at least try. The case then goes on to introduce many new characters and even features that weren't in any other cases, like being able to examine a 3D model of the evidence, a puzzle minigame, taking fingerprints, and even using luminol to search for blood traces. This gives the investigation segments of the case a lot more variety, and even though all of these are rather simple, it's still fun to do something new every now and then. Further into the case, you learn that exactly at the same time, there was a similar murder in the police station evidence room, and it's the same victim? Damon Gant, the chief of police, comes into play, and he's definitely hiding something, trying his best to convince the court that this killing has nothing to do with what happened at our crime scene. At this point, the game hands you a piece of evidence that, for me, breaks the whole case. A list of people who entered the evidence room that day, or rather a list of police IDs, complete with their time of entering the room. Now, the time being on there pretty much instantly confirms how the crime was committed. Someone went in there way earlier than the others, killed the poor guy, and shipped him over to the prosecutor's office. This is not an easy feat in a police department, even one as incompetent as Ace Attorney depicts. I wonder who could have so much influence as to create a way to get out of that situation. Oh, and of course, the number that entered is 777-7777, so it's probably someone important. Oh, and once you point this out in court, they can't be identified because numbers starting with a 7 belong to high-ranking members of the force that are exempt from investigations if they aren't directly involved. I think you get what I'm getting at here. For it being the most complex crime, the longest and also final case of the game, it is way too easy to guess the killer in this crime. But of course we can prove their involvement because we've been to Gant's office and opened his safe with, wouldn't you know it, the number 777-7777. And then we're asked for a motive. Nobody cares for the motives of the defendants. Ever. Not a single person we're defending in these 5 trials had any reason to harm, let alone kill the victims. But nobody cares. The only time it's even brought up is in the 3rd case, and even that gets thrown aside pretty quickly because why would you even ask for a motive in a legal system that is known to enforce the death penalty? It's time to dig deep into an old case again, the SL9 incident. This was a serial killing that ended with an officer being killed in Damon Gant and Lana Sky's shared office, and Gant's motive can be found buried deep in this case. In short, he found the serial killer, the officer, and Emma, who was waiting for her sister in her office, all lying unconscious after a struggle. He decides to kill the officer, making it look like Emma killed him by accident, and when Lana comes in and finds the gruesome scene, he blackmails her into covering up the crime so nobody finds out about what Emma did. He does all of that so he can force Lana to become chief prosecutor, so he can basically have control over the whole legal system of the district. Damon Gant is a genius. He did all that in a matter of minutes, managed to cover everything up, and basically had free reign over the district for years on end, only to be found out because he used his police ID as the code for the safe where he stored the only evidence of his crimes. I mean, I get that they can't create a perfect crime scene in a game like this. There has to be a way to find the culprit. I just think they could have come up with a better way to lead you to his crimes than the incredibly obvious ID thing. Other than that though, this case is stellar. We have not one but two crimes that are actually not only well thought out, but also complex enough not to be obvious from the get-go. A great new set of characters, with Damon Gant being one of the most interesting and smart villains I've seen in a game, and the new features make this case stand out from the rest. A worthy follow-up to Turnabout Goodbyes, and certainly the best case in the game. If it wasn't for this stupid piece of shit puzzle, why is it so hard to align that freaking vase to look like this monstrosity that plagues you throughout the whole case? You try and try and try, and it never works. You have to listen to this cursed music over and over and over again. This one single thing ruined the case, no, the whole game for me, and it should burn. What did you think about my opinion on the first Ace Attorney game? I really enjoyed my time with it a lot more than I thought. Sure, there are some logic errors in the cases, and sometimes the solutions are just borderline stupid, but it more than makes up for it with unmatched charm, a fun gameplay loop, and incredible music. Is my evidence sufficient, or do you have an objection? Feel free to tell me in the comments. I always love reading them. Also, if you want to help me in growing the channel, give the video a like so it can spread to more people. Thank you very much, and remember to always keep that backlog rolling.